Hello. No, okay, right. Hello. I'm going to be sort of wandering over here and then back to my laptop because I can't get the remote thing to work. But so thank you for coming. This is me talking about building themes with the WordPress REST API, like this. Hey. So I'm Jacka Lenoxe. I work on the theme division at Automatic. I'm on the theme generators team, and we have a few people on our team that build themes pretty much all the time. And then I work on things around themes, so like the theme experience, when people get set up with a new theme, that kind of thing. But I have a background of working with building themes at agencies and that kind of thing. Maybe I should just sort of make this less. Right, so the REST API. What's the big deal? I'm going to get into a bit more detail. This isn't good for the camera, I appreciate, because I keep going over here. I'm going to get into a bit more detail about the REST API itself. But to start off with, I'm just going to show you some examples of sites that use it in various different guises. This was a project that the Sunday Times created. There was a competition in the UK called Build the News. And this is a website built with Angular.js, which some of you probably know about, but it's using a WordPress backend, and it kind of shows some of the cool things that you can do. Yeah, sorry. So you can go sort of right and left. So if you go like right, sorry. That's right. So you can see how it's using post formats, and you can see how we've got like a list of posts here. If you scroll down, or yeah, or that's fine. That's fine. If 2 fingers, that's cool. I shouldn't have run the battery flat, so it wouldn't work. Anyway, yeah, so you can, actually that's not a great example anyway. But you can see like the post format icons in the top right-hand corner. But you can also see how amazingly performant this is. We're sort of navigating through pages of posts with pretty much no delay. Like it's just loading this stuff. This is a real website. This isn't on my computer. It's incredible. As in, I mean, it's not local. So it's quite amazing. One of the best examples we have on WordPress.com is Quartz. This is a really nice website. It does partly depend on the internet speed. So I'll try and show you it and see how good it works. And actually, to be honest, it could be better. So we'll go into that a bit later on in the talk. But so what Quartz does, it's a normal WordPress website initially, but if we click through to a story, so these kind of expand, but I'll go down to the main. Oh. Sorry. Try this one. Let's give this a go. Sorry, I can continue.
Just close. Just close to the window, it should work.
The only problem I have is, let's try going to here. No, it's not. It's because I'm trying to be too clever. It's cool. I'll keep going. Right. Yeah, so if we get down to like a normal post, here we go, like a normal post link. When we click a link, it is going to the REST API to get the data, and it may, here we go, it got it. That didn't really show the benefit of the performance in terms of speed, but you could see the way it's nice and it kind of animates, it looks nice. There's a theme called Collections that we have on WordPress.com. This uses Backbone, Quartz uses Backbone as well, sorry, just to cover that. This is a really nice theme called called Collections. It has like all different sections, and as you click through to a section, this is a normal kind of page load. But then once you're in the section, as you move from one to the other, it uses the REST API and Backbone to load different bits of data. It's really nice. Now, this is the best one I've found. I made this. This was something I did over Christmas. This green is called Badass. It's the hexadecimal code BADA55. And this actually obviously isn't very good, but it uses the WordPress core REST API that's being developed at the moment. So if I click to load a different page, it just loads that page here. Now, it doesn't look very pretty. I'll take that. So that one it's loading over. Yeah, that was an actual AJAX request. Requests are being stored in local storage. I'll come back to all of this. Don't worry, I'm just showing it off. So now, we recently had a meetup where we were developing this idea further, and we turned it into this, which is much prettier. And this kind of demonstrates a bit better what we can do. This is a WordPress theme, and if we click through to say About, there's literally no load time whatsoever. We get page content here, and I think there's comments as well. Matt loves it. That's not real, he didn't say that. If we go to USS Enterprise, another one. And if we go back to the home page, I don't know what I'm looking up, but let's do this. If we look through to the actual posts, you can see this is a post, and we've got the previous link. If I can press that now, and that's how quickly it loads the post before. It seems things slightly odd because I think because of the scroll with it being on a small screen, but yeah, it's really nice. And I can also actually navigate, you can't see this, but with my fingers, I can navigate left and right, which you could build into a theme with this technique. Right. So there are three main aspects to what I'm going to talk about today. First up is what is a REST API and how does it work? The second is how you can work with the REST API in your projects and what form that takes. And then the third, we're going to go into some actual technical details on building a theme that uses the REST API. So, chapter 1, what is a REST API? Who's familiar with a REST API in this room? Oh, okay, a few, okay. So yeah, it stands for Representational State Transfer Application Programming Interface. Now, there's a whole load of theory to what a REST API is and what it can do, but it's easily summed up with these points, I think. What it essentially does is it provides a way to retrieve pure data from, in this case, a WordPress website using HTTP. So whereas when you're building WordPress stuff, normally if you're building a theme, you would have to program a loop in PHP, and that's how you would get your content out of your blog. This just gives you the data straight up, and you don't need to do any programming as such to get that data. And so obviously it's good for mobile apps and environments where you don't want a full web page to render, but you want to get content from your blog or site. How does this relate to WordPress? The REST API is coming to core. I'm going to get onto. So, a short history of WordPress REST APIs. WordPress.com has had one since 2012, and you can actually use that already with a self-hosted site via Jetpack. And now there's a core plugin being developed. It's known as WP API, and it was forked from a plugin in the WordPress repository, the WordPress plugin repository called JSON API. That was first put into the repository in 2009, and that was actually built as part of a project for the MoMA in New York, the Museum of Modern Art, and they basically wanted to build a Ruby on Rails front end with a WordPress back end, and so they didn't have a way of interfacing with the WordPress data, so they built a REST API, which was the first one that I'm aware of. So you may be wondering what it looks like, and here we have a sample request. So the top part here is just pure JSON, which some of you may be familiar with. You can sort of prettify it, so it at least includes line breaks and stuff, just so you can see what's going on. Fortunately, Chrome is also quite nice for this. You can actually view the response from the REST API. It puts it in alphabetical order, and yeah, it's much easier for a human to understand what's actually coming back. So this is essentially getting the latest 10 posts, and you can see this is like your normal, the content, and you can see your p tags and stuff, or maybe you can't if you're at the back. Yeah, and you get all this content back from the API. So you may be wondering, if there was a plugin in the repository in 2009, why am I talking about this now? Why is it going into core now? And this is sort of my opinion, but JavaScript. JavaScript has obviously come on leaps and bounds. I remember sort of 10 years ago when it was a very poor cousin on the internet. People used to mock it. There were things like Dynamic Drive, where they showed you dynamic HTML and all these quirky things that you can do. And yeah, it's now obviously getting really serious. There's, I think now, about 30 people at Automatic who are called JavaScript engineers, and they're right at the forefront of what we're doing at the moment. To elaborate on that slightly, oh yeah, and JavaScript is being developed to work very well with REST APIs. So to expand on that, there's obviously these technologies, which you're probably familiar with at least one of them. But Backbone, Angular, and Ember are all specifically designed for working with REST APIs. One thing I found really interesting when I was first researching this talk is that in 2009, when that REST API first went into the WordPress plugin repository, none of those technologies existed. Or if they did exist, they were right in their infancy. That's fine. This is, oh, a longer charging lead. Oh, brilliant. Right. Sorry, quick technical break, and I'm going to, thank you so much. Right, that's better. So none of these technologies, Backbone, Angular, Ember, they didn't exist. I think Node had just started in 2009, but it obviously didn't have anything like the uptake that it has now. And JavaScript really in 2009, really, no one thought it was going to be the thing it is today. I don't think, anyway. I certainly didn't. And I think the power of what you can do with JavaScript is very well summed up by a guy called Trek Glowacki, who's on the core team of Ember. And he said, since the start of the web, for every interaction there have been two computers involved. There have been two supercomputers involved. The supercomputer sitting in front of you and the supercomputer in a data center somewhere. We have barely begun to take advantage of that supercomputer sitting in front of you. And it's a really good point. And when you think about the disparity we have with native applications and the web, that kind of it tells you everything you need to know. We don't do so many things that we could do in the web. Partly because we haven't been able to until very recently, partly because we still can't do certain things in the web that you can do in a native application. So, hopefully you're all really excited now, and we can get on to how we can work with it. A single-page application is the kind of umbrella term that we've come to know sort of JavaScript-based applications on the web as. So quickly, who's familiar with a single-page application? Who's heard of an SPA? So quite a few of us, yeah. So essentially, it's not a multi-page web application, which is kind of the old-school way that a website would work. I've written up here that it has only one initial server-side page load. Now, that is slightly subjective, because with Node, you are actually loading stuff from the server, but I won't go into that. For the purposes of WordPress developers, there's one server-side page load, i.e. when the user first comes to your site, and then from that point on, JavaScript takes over. So the interactions are handled with JavaScript. When someone clicks a link, you're not actually allowing that to go to the server. You do the thing you want to do with it. And when done well, it provides a more continuous and fluid experience. When done badly, it really doesn't, which we could go into. It's nothing new. Gmail was first released in 2004. And Gmail is, I think, one of the first major single-page applications that I was aware of. I remember it being a real hit back in 2004 because it was using Ajax, and you would click through the different links on the left-hand side, and the page wouldn't reload, which is that multi-page thing. I didn't quite explain that yet. So on a multi-page web application, the user clicks a link, that goes off to the server, the browser re-renders the whole page, and the whole thing comes back. With single page, you're just changing the bits that are relevant to what the user actually wants to see. You're not re-rendering the whole thing again for no reason. And Gmail was the first big service that I knew of that did this. But it took quite a long time for other people to jump on the bandwagon. This was 2004. And equally, they had to do a lot of work to make it something that we could all think about. It's also important to say that it's not all or nothing. There are plenty of themes and plugins that have elements of a single-page application within them. You might have like an area of a site where something happens dynamically, and a bit like the customizer, which I'll come on to, where you don't have to it's not this thing where you have to build the whole thing as one big single-page application. And actually, I'm talking about it like it's a new thing, but lots of WordPress plugins already make use of it. Easy Digital Downloads has a really neat thing that also uses the Heartbeat API, which came up earlier, whereby you can actually watch your sales kind of happening live on the page. That's the kind of thing where you're not actually having to refresh the whole page, which is quite exciting. And Backbone has been included in WordPress core since 2012, mainly because of this. This is the original theme customizer, which hasn't changed a lot. And when it first went into core, you couldn't expand it in the way that Tomas showed us earlier. But yeah, this is what it looked like. And so it's a single-page application within WordPress. So that's that. So what can you actually do with the REST API? So there is more to this, and someone who's an expert in REST APIs would point that out right now. But essentially, a REST API centers around a series of verbs. The most common verbs that most of us would deal with are get, post, put, and delete. They're kind of obvious. Get, post, pages, comments, etc. Edit and add posts and pages and comments via post or put. And delete, which is post, pages, and comments. And they match up to the HTTP requests as well. So, how far are we in? About 20 minutes. Didn't I say something about themes? And yes, that's the title of this talk. So chapter 3, this talk, building themes that use the REST API. That's kind of my introduction over. Why would you build a theme that uses the REST API? This isn't a bad question, and there are some reasons why you shouldn't do this right now. but it's kind of an experimental exploratory thing, which is really good fun. Hopefully you can see from some of the sites I've shown you that it's pretty cool. But the thing is, I'm calling it building themes with the REST API. We're obviously actually talking about building themes with JavaScript. You could build a theme in PHP that gets all of its data from the REST API. There's all sorts of WordPress functions in there for helping consume external REST APIs. But that would be kind of pointless, because if you were doing it through PHP, you haven't got any of these benefits that I've been talking about. So I have to kind of shift that. We are talking about JavaScript. So, benefits. I've already kind of demonstrated some of them. I've compressed them into what I think are the key benefits, but you've obviously got the look and feel. You can do all sorts of things with animations if you're not actually reloading the whole page. You can do animations if you are reloading the whole page, but it's a bit crap. You know, the page goes white, then something comes in, then something animates. And you see websites that do that, but it's not as nice as something just dynamically occurring from page to page. It's really exciting. Now, the speed thing is really interesting. With that JSON data that I was showing you get back from the REST API, you can do all sorts of things with that with JavaScript. And you can queue up content, which I'll come on to, when the user first hits your site. So you can actually download like the latest 10 posts from the WordPress site when the user first hits it. And then if in the standard example, if they're seeing 10 blog posts, when they click those blog posts, there's not even a server request, because you've already got the title, you've already actually got the content, even if you're only showing them a snippet. You have got it already. So you can take them straight through to that post with no load time at all. It's like less than 0.10 of a second. It's brilliant. There's the offline factor. If you're controlling the user interactions through JavaScript, then if the user is trying to make a request that's not working, you can interact with that. You can say, oh, it's not going through. I can show them a message and say, oh, sorry, it seems like you're offline. And that's great when you think about mobile users, people who might be going on the metro or something. They might just be losing signal for whatever reason. How many of us have got our phones out and tried to look at something, and even if it was actually on your phone tries to reload it when you take your phone out of your pocket, and then it's gone. Or if you try and click a link when you've lost signal or whatever, it's really annoying. But this way, you can give your users some control, and you can control what happens. And there's a potentially reduced server load. Now, I say potentially, that's pretty broad in terms of how people build things with this, but in the example I just gave, where you're getting the 10 posts from the site when the user first gets there, you're not making any further requests. You might not make any further requests for the rest of that user's visit. You obviously might be getting images and stuff, so there are things that are going to be needed to be downloaded. But it's very interesting that you can actually just shift a load of stuff straight into the client when the user first arrives, and then you can manipulate that data behind the scenes and show them a really snappy user experience. So, how could you get started? I kind of think there are two main routes that we can take today. The first one, which I've had a few people actually mention, is just kind of going full JavaScript. So you can build a whole thing in Node. You don't really need WordPress at all. WordPress you would have somewhere on an installation, and you would just consume the data from that REST API, and you wouldn't really do anything on the WordPress side. You might allow a client to get into the back end. That's kind of how the first example I showed from the Sunday Times in the UK, that's how that works. They're using Angular, and they're not trying to support any WordPress stuff at all. They just get the data they want from WordPress. It's totally agnostic. If they wanted, they could bin WordPress and switch to a different CMS that also has a REST API, like Drupal. Don't hit me. And then they could take the data from there, and they'd only have to sort of slightly refactor their interface. It's really interesting. However, right now for me, I'm not so keen on this because it's hard to distribute. Like if you wanted to build a theme that people can actually use, how are they going to install it? If it's not actually using WordPress, and if it's all on Node, they've got to actually set up two different servers. They need a WordPress server, and they need to set Node up somewhere. And they've got a whole new load of problems, when obviously what we really want is to allow them to use it conventionally, as we might think. So that's the second route. A skeleton theme, which can be installed, but from the first page load, JavaScript takes over. So we don't need loads of the stuff that's normally in a theme, and I'll come on to that. We can just package it up in a way where it's installable as a theme. It's got an index.php and a style.css. But from that point on, we can do whatever the hell we like with the rest of it. And I think this is really exciting. The other actual consideration with that is that if the like one of the examples I've seen with the Sunday Times example that I showed at the start, if the user who's using the WordPress side of things clicks any of the links throughout the WordPress dashboard that relate to the front, like view post when you're editing a post or something like that, none of those links are going to work because they're not, like, if you're just doing it all totally separately, then the user's all over the place. So there's lots of things. Down the line, we might get to the point of the first route where people are doing that as standard, and there may be some way of installing that, who knows, within WordPress. But anyway, so that's another thing to think about. So the second route is the route that I'm taking. That's how Picard works. That was that theme I showed you. And I'm going to get into some opinionated stuff now. As I mentioned, there are lots of frameworks. There's Backbone and Angular and Ember. There's lots of ways of building themes that use the REST API. But I'm going to go with what I think is one of the most minimal examples and hopefully easiest to explain. So our number one thing is vanilla JavaScript. That's not a framework or anything, that is just JavaScript. It confuses some people, and there's actually a website, I think it's vanillajs.com, which makes it sound like it's a framework, but when you read it closely, it's just talking about actual JavaScript. And I say vanilla just because, in a way, it keeps things simple. You're not having to worry about all these different dependencies. You just have the key things like React, which is the next thing I'll come on to. You've then got Browserify. Browserify, in simple terms, allows you to include JavaScript files from other JavaScript files. So in exactly the same way you would do that in PHP, it pretty much gives you that capability. And that just allows you to create a saner, rather than one enormous JavaScript file, which is going to get pretty messy and hard to maintain. It allows you to create some of that sense of a theme structure, which we're probably more familiar with. And finally, Gulp. In Franz Joseph's talk before, he mentioned Grunt. Gulp is very similar. I just slightly prefer it. It's another JavaScript task runner, so you can use it for compiling Sass, and you can use it for smushing loads of JavaScript files into one, so it kind of links up with Browserify. You can use it for watching. If a file gets edited, then it will run a task. It can compress images, all those kinds of things. So, vanilla JavaScript. There aren't a lot of things we actually need to do that initial Picard theme that I showed you. Obviously, one of the most pivotal ones is the XML HTTP request, also known as XHR, which is the core of Ajax, although in this instance it's actually Ajaj, because it's asynchronous JavaScript and JSON, and not XML, because the WordPress REST API returns JSON. So if we wanted to get pedantic. And in fact, even the title of that function becomes slightly relevant, because we're not actually doing an XML HTTP request. Anyway, semantics. Local storage is a really interesting thing. It's supported by, I think, all browsers back to like IE9. It's amazing. It's a bit like a cookie in a way, but it's just a way of storing data in the browser's memory. So you can store anything that you've had, put it in the browser's memory, and you can then get it back out again. And it's incredibly easy to use in vanilla JavaScript. You don't need any like jQuery wrapper. You just do like local storage.set or local storage.get. And then there's things like Service Worker. Has anyone heard of Service Worker? Or Service Workers? Oh, yeah. So that's the thing that people at Google are working on. And it will basically, it's another sort of JavaScript, well, it will be part of core JavaScript, hopefully, at some point. But it will allow you to control cached data. So you can actually store a lot more things on the client side. And you can have a lot more control over what happens if the server has gone. And the example I brought up, because this really annoys me with I'm on an iPhone, and if you're in mobile Safari and you've loaded up a site, if you don't even try and do anything, but you lose connection if you're on a plane or something, and you reopen Safari, it often tries to refresh immediately, and it doesn't work. Service Worker kind of intervenes at that point. So when you first open a browser, even if you're not online, your websites might still work. And they'll come up and say, I'm not online yet, so like I'm only showing you articles from BBC News or whatever from 3 days ago, but this is what I do have. And so you have suddenly a whole new load of control. There is something that already exists called application cache, but it's a nightmare, so we won't go into that. But yeah, Service Worker is really exciting. So by building things in this way, we're kind of opening ourselves up for new technologies. So React. Did I ask who's familiar with React? Has anyone come across React? Okay, cool. So it's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It was developed by Facebook over the course of quite a few years. They open sourced it in 2013, and it's now become much more of a sort of community project. It's no longer just this kind of thing they're using, and it's really, really good. It's really awesome. And they've got some really innovative ways of dealing with interfaces. So what does it look like? This is a little bit of React, which is going slightly off the screen, so I might just try and, there we go. So I won't, I won't go into, it's obviously fairly simple. They have this create class method, which you kind of run, and it allows you, in this really simple example, we're just going to render a property through to the component with this wrapper. Now, the really crazy part of React, and the bit that might make some people think, what the hell's going on there, is that alongside React, Facebook created something called JSX, which is a new syntax that's a very minor modification to JavaScript. And what it allows you to do is actually put HTML straight in your JavaScript, which makes some people go like, "Ooh, that looks really horrible." But it's actually, when you get used to it, it's really cool. And what it's actually, the funny thing about JSX is it's not actually passed by the browsers or anything. It's just compiled into normal JavaScript. I actually don't have the example of how this would look, but it just gives you a shorthand, and it allows you to produce things that people can interact with. So when I come on to showing you my theme, you would know how to edit some of the DOM elements because you can see them, and like a designer, you can have no technical knowledge whatsoever, and as long as you understand basic HTML, you can interact with a React file, which is quite exciting. So how might a JavaScript-based theme look? So this is kind of the current standard. I mean, it's simplified, and I'm not including everything in here, but you've obviously got the standard things like index and header and footer and the content parts, or template parts, sorry, style, JavaScript, and everything else. So obviously some people do add a bit more structure to their themes, and you can break things down into more directories, but this is kind of the simple way of getting started. The way I've been going with my React stuff is kind of like this. So all the theme actually needs from WordPress's perspective is style.css and index.php, and then it can run. And then we have all of this lovely structure. And it can go further. I've kind of broken it down into what you actually have in the DOM, except for the router, which I'll come on to. So we have these JSX files, and basically they all get compiled into that one JavaScript file. So when the theme starts, that's all that's actually happening. The rest of it is really just development stuff. Like, you could not pass that on to a client because they don't actually need any of the JSX stuff. That's just what makes this whole thing at the end. Now, the exciting, fun thing, am I gonna? Right, okay, no, I'll come back to that. So, the fun thing with building themes this way is suddenly there's loads of things you have to worry about that you never used to have to worry about. So this is, I can actually zoom out slightly. This, oh, do you know what, I will go to that. So, yeah, basically this presentation is a WordPress theme that's been built with the REST API. That would have looked cooler if I hadn't had all the problems with my remotes. Because I'm using the right and left arrow keys, the remotes don't seem to be able to replicate that. So that's why I can't flick through the slides. But all of these slides are actually just WordPress posts. And I'm using the next and previous post links and getting that from the WordPress REST API, which is quite cool. So this is the theme that's doing it. This is not good in this. I haven't documented it. I haven't put a README on there. So yeah, don't sort of copy anything out of it. But and there's loads of junk in there that I'm using just for testing stuff and everything. So yeah, it's a good thing to see, and I'll have a link at the end. But I'm going to quickly try and explain some of it. So if we move from that top level directory into components, now you can see we've got this picard.jsx file. And so this is the picard.jsx file. That's the name of the theme. Now there is some jQuery in here again, which I'm going to try and get rid of because that's the whole point of what I said in my bit about not having jQuery. But you can see we're basically just hacking what happens with the click event on the menu and doing some stuff. The most important part of all of this is that bit right at the bottom, react.render the router, because the router is kind of the parent component for everything. Now, some of you might not even know what a router is, and you kind of have one without even thinking about it. This is the router, isn't it? Yeah. So this is the router file. Now, what it basically does is it takes the URLs that the user's trying to go to, and it turns them into something that we're going to do with JavaScript. Yeah, part of the problem of trying to build a theme with JavaScript is that you don't have that innate thing where PHP can just take the request and deal with it. And we have the problem whereby users could have any permalink structure. Technically, at this point, this theme won't support any permalink structure, but it's not too hard to do that, and I will be doing that soon with the other one that we're working on. So you can see I'm using a little JavaScript library called page.js. That's what these page methods are, or page functions. So what it's doing, for example, at the top level, you can see where it's just getting the root, so just the /. What it does is it passes on to the content component the URL of just wp-json/posts. Now, at the moment, that's how the WordPress REST API gives you like your latest 10 posts, for example. The canny-eyed among you might think, well, hang on, what if the user has set a static homepage? And the answer is it won't work. So that's something I would need to deal with, but right now, that's something we would do. We could obviously work out if the user has set a static homepage by localizing the JavaScript and finding from the site options what they've set. But anyway, for now, that's what it does, because that's all I needed it to do. If the user is trying to go to a site that's a normal permalink, with a slug at the end, we can pass to the REST API that request, and we can use this filter attribute, filter variable with the REST API, and we can basically pass to that anything that you can pass to WP query. So it's quite nice. So you can kind of search through posts by name by doing basically this in WP query, and again, it passes that down to the content component. So the content component is where, and I've got another one with like this kind of is a catch-all, and it does like a page one as well. So the content component, which is this, I'm just checking my tabs are set up right. Right, cool. So what this does is it takes the URL that it gets given, and it does currently a jQuery AJAX request. And you can see what it does is it gets that data back. Some of this is kind of React stuff, so I won't go into too much detail, but if you do go to the React website, which I'll have a link to at the end, you'll start to understand how this works. The component has state, and when that state is updated, everything else kind of follows suit in React. So it does a normal, this is just taken, I think, straight from like the jQuery example, like documentation. So you have an AJAX request. On success, which is the key thing here, you can ignore some of that. That's just where it's doing other stuff that you don't need to know about. The important point is that it sets the state to the data which has come back from the request. And that's what sort of sets the whole of the rest of the thing in motion. The other thing I'm doing is I'm setting local storage with each bit of data that I get back from the REST API. That's not best practice by a long shot, because basically that means that it will never ever, I'm not setting any expiry or anything, so it will never ever change. So once the user has visited your site, what they downloaded is all they will ever see, which is obviously really stupid, but it's good for demonstrative purposes because you can see the benefit. Now obviously what you could do is set an expiry, and then do sort of background AJAX requests and update as necessary. You could obviously set something on in local storage that was a timestamp of when the user first downloaded data, and do that kind of thing. Equally, you could use session storage, which is exactly the same as local storage, but gets cleared when the user closes their browser. It's still not exactly good, because if some people keep their browsers open for years, so like that's not a safe way of doing it. But it just shows you that way that you can queue up data. You can just do it on each visit or something like that. You could take in the thing. One element that I find interesting about this is that when I used to work on client websites at an agency, most of their websites actually wouldn't change very often. So in some cases, you could do this. Like if it's something that you're never going to update, you know, or it's an old conference website that's it's already happened or something, so it's just now in the archives, that actually wouldn't matter. And just users would come to your site and pretty much never make requests. It'd be quite funny. But anyway, so that's that. So the important point is it sets the state data. And now we can see where this filters down. Because, again, it's JSX syntax. So the other thing that JSX allows you to do is use other components, kind of like HTML elements. If anyone's been looking at, I completely forgot what they're called, like the Polymer project that Google are working on with web components, this is kind of related. So this could be HTML, but we're using the loop component because it's got a capital letter. That's how React knows what it is. And the important point again here is it passes this data that we had earlier, which we got back from the REST API, to loop as data. So if we move to loop, so yeah, we've gone down a level now. We've gone into the content directory. We've got this bit here, and there's loop, loop.jsx, and we go into loop. In fact, yeah, that kind of is what you need to know. So we map through, in this top left-hand corner, we map through the data, and which basically kind of is a way in JavaScript of sort of looping over an array, getting all the stuff out. And we pass it to the entry component, which again now has a capital H. We're actually doing that separately from the main return from the component because we want to wrap it in an animation. So React has some native support for animations, and it provides these CSS classes that you can animate on, which is quite cool. So that's why they're coming out here in this div, and then you can see the rest of it. And then we have our next and previous post links. There's some weird stuff. This dangerously set inner HTML is because I'm passing in HTML that I know is HTML, and I don't want it escaped. React by default will escape everything. I don't want that to happen because then it will not appear as I want it to appear. And I know the HTML is safe because I've provided it. So that's okay. I've passed some sort of threshold. I don't know. Or maybe this is a warning, because maybe there's something actually wrong with this, and someone can point that out to me. Anyway, so that's my next and previous links. And what I did with my presentation is I've hacked the right and left. Well, not hacked, but I've added an event. In fact, I think that's in here. Yeah, so you can see this is where I'm doing my event on the key code. So 37 is left, 39 is right. That's just the thing. And there's a whole lot of junk here that you don't need to worry about. I was testing some stuff with animations, but the key part is what it does is it gets the URL, it's kind of at the bottom of both of them, of the next or previous link. It cuts it down to just the end of the link, which we don't want the domain or anything like that. And then it passes that through to this page.js library thing, which I told you about, and that causes the whole thing to move to the next page. And I will come back to that in a sec. But so finally, we get to the entry. You saw that I passed the data from loop to entry. So entry is in its own little folder again, just to keep things nice and tidy. And then in entry, it's going to look fairly familiar to hopefully some of you. So yeah, you can kind of see this is pretty much the same structure that is used in underscores. So we have the article. We can pass in the post class. It has this annoying like camel case class name thing in HTML, just because I think class is a protected, is protected within JavaScript, so you can't just use class. So that's the only variation from normal HTML. And I think you can use IDs just normally, not that you necessarily want to. But anyway, so that's our, that's our classes. So this is kind of just normal theme stuff. But it's obviously getting that data that I passed it. So you can see where like the props.title goes in. I've got this like handle add thing, which it shouldn't be called handle add. That's basically just handling links. So if someone clicks it, it's a link. Like if it was in a list, that would work. And then you've got this .props.content. Again, we keep having this dangerously set inner HTML because that's just making sure we know it's HTML and it's okay. We don't want to escape it. And that goes into entry content. Now, obviously, you could technically break this down even further. You could have entry header could be a component, and entry content could be a component, and it could keep going down and down. And if your project was very complicated, then you may want to do that. One aspect of this that I really like, is anyone familiar with atomic design that Brad Frost has been talking about for the last couple of years or so? No one? Okay, cool. He's basically a big fan of componentized web design. So rather than trying to go from the top down and thinking about how the website's going to look right from the word go, when he's dealing with a client, he just sends them little bits. And he's got it broken down, I think it's to atoms, molecules, organisms. I think it then becomes templates, and then that becomes web pages. So an atom is like a button or a form field, like just an input field or something. And then a molecule is an actual little search form or something like that. And then an organism is like a header or a sidebar or something. The really nice thing is, it's not really that relevant necessarily, but it's really compatible with that. And it allows this really clever way of making code that you're not going to have to keep reusing. Because the more we break these things down, the more we can just pull in those components. And you saw how easy that was when I was pulling in the other components higher up. Hopefully you can see how easy that was. So I think, yeah, that's that. Jikui. Did I say that right? That may have been a bit intense for some people, so you may have some questions. So I've put that presentation is up. It's hard to kind of try to go into React without sort of going into a whole separate talk about React. That theme I showed, actually currently the lame one is on picardtheme.com. And we're going to be updating that with the newer one. The full theme we're going to be releasing on Automatic's GitHub, and it will be fully documented and with a README and inline documentation and everything. So we're working on that at the moment, and that will be hopefully a much easier way of penetrating all this stuff. The WP API project you can follow on GitHub. React has its own page. The React Facebook GitHub thing is incredible. They've got amazing tutorials on there. They explain loads of the ways in which it works, the reason it's so performant. And then there's just some really good posts that have been written fairly recently. There's a guy who works at the Times in London, and yeah, he wrote this My WordPress Renaissance. I'll put all these slides up, so you don't try and download them, copy the links or anything. I'll put them all on Twitter and stuff, and I'm obviously on Twitter at Jacka Lenoxe. But yeah, any questions? Yes.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. So one thing is like about the URL, because like if everything is just to load up as like Ajax code, then I also want to give to users to be able to go back to that result they actually gathered, you know, through the time.
That's a really good point. I actually didn't cover that.
Yeah.
So the good thing for that, I'll come back on that one quickly. So there's a technology in most browsers now. I think it's not in IE9, but I think it's in IE10, called push state. And so what that page library does that I was showing you, in fact, let me show you, because yeah, I can demonstrate. So if I take this out of presentation mode for this talk, you can see that this is actually on the URL for this page. And if I hit back, it will go back. The animation's wrong, it's the wrong way around, but it will actually run back through my slides. I can go forward again.
Okay, so how do you do that?
So how do I do it?
Yeah.
So it's a thing called push state. If you're using Page.js, it automatically uses push state. If you're using something like Backbone, you can just say, when you first set your Backbone JavaScript in motion, you just put push state true. There's a load of stuff on the web about even just with jQuery, with using a jQuery Ajax event, and it shows you how to update it with push state. And it's definitely it's now, yeah, I think it's there's 5% of people using the internet don't have push state. And even if they don't have push state, you can actually just use the hashes. So that's the kind of previous way of doing it. So you would put hashes after the URL, and then you could still do backwards and forwards. And I think Page.js will automatically do that if push state doesn't work. So this should work on even IE9. I haven't tested it, but this should work in theory, back and forward.
Okay, I hope it will. And the second question is about the security, because you can delete also stuff from the database and everything. You can do basically everything from there. And so I'm wondering how this is done. How can I show?
So yeah, so the REST API, which is going into core, that has authentication. So you can get certain things without authentication. But if you want to edit stuff, you have to actually authenticate that. At the moment, I think they're using basic authentication, which essentially means that you have to use a username and password to perform certain things that you might want to do, like posting a comment, I think posting a comment you can do, because obviously anyone technically could do that, but editing a post, deleting a post, that needs to be authenticated. And if you try to request it, it's just like the current XML RPC, which is like the old school API for WordPress. It won't let you do those things without being authenticated. So I should have mentioned that as well. Yeah. Does that cover it? Cool. Anyone else?
Thank you for the presentation. I would just like to ask about mobile clients. You transfer the data in JSON. Do I get it right from the endpoint, which is quite talking, isn't it?
Quite what? Sorry.
It's JSON. You need to have the keys over there for every item. You transfer the same key over the time. You know. That's
if it's authentic. It's really weird. That's if it's authenticated. So I think someone wants me to wrap up, but yeah, that's if it's. If it's authenticated, yes, you would. So there are
just for the index page.
No, if you're just getting, you can just get without any tokens. You just give it the URL, and you can just get. I've used it, I think, on iOS.
Oh no! When you transfer the content to render on the client side, you transfer it from the WordPress endpoint in the JSON format, which means that wherever you have 1,000 posts on that index. For every from every post, you have title, double comma.
Oh.
You know, it's.
I think I know what you mean, and I mean I'm not like a mobile developer, but I think so. If you do you mean on like the posts request? Am I getting every single post?
Sure, yes.
No. So the good thing is the REST API, it uses the same limit on pagination that the loop normally does. So like if you just do like on a homepage like the loop, you'll get 10. Like if you don't say, you'll get 10. So unless you've changed that setting on WordPress.com, I think WordPress.org, I think it's settings reading where you can set how many posts you want the user to see by default. The REST API uses that. So you'd only get 10, like unless you specifically say you want like all of them, which you probably wouldn't do because that would be really, that would not be performant, that would be stupid.
Okay, and on the mobile level, the render rate, which takes some more processing power to parse it and then render the layout. Can React handle this on mobile clients? Well, from your experience.
Basically, yeah, it's brilliant. So the thing that React does, I don't want to get too much on that because I'm not also that knowledgeable about it, but React, the really pioneering thing they did was they have this virtual DOM. So they do re-render the whole page on every single thing that happens, technically, in the browser. But they're doing it with this virtual DOM, and then they diff. So because they have another DOM which they're like making the changes to, which is just basically JSON, they're not having to actually loop through the actual DOM and change the right things. They just swap out the whole thing. And to demonstrate the performance of it, the Atom editor that GitHub have made has been rewritten in React. And if you see how it was when it first came out versus how it is now, it's so much faster. And it's mental because when each key press, the whole thing is re-rendering, but it's really fast.
There was an update to Atom a week ago when they just, from some parts, they just removed the React rendering and just... They
just take it now?
Yeah. Oh. Sorry to hear that.
Well, it was much better when they, I mean, they may have found, to be fair, like it's not, I mean, it wasn't built for like a native...
It's from the release 0.182.
Yeah. I remember they wrote a post about how much better it made it. Like, I'm not, to be honest, when I heard it, I thought it sounded a bit crazy because JavaScript in like it doesn't sound like the best idea.
That's a very special case when you just put on every keystroke, you put a letter, so it's just not ordinary web.
The crazy part was it did make it more performant than their previous approach, and it was much snappier. Like, but yeah, I'm sure it could still be refined, and that's probably why they've changed it. So, yeah,
okay.
totally.
Thank you very much.
But yeah. And actually, one thing I'll do to this, like if you want to test this out, the Picard theme, like it does work on mobile browsers and stuff. So. Like try it out, and like the animations are great. And this is on. I haven't got like swipe things, so you can't go through this on a mobile device. But I'll add them so you can swipe left and right, and then you can see. But I was testing it out. Like the first animation happens, and it's really fast, and you can Anyone else? Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think one is also interesting to see. I haven't seen really well. Is that there the URL which you actually call via the Ajax call is the important part, right? Because you call the query is actually done by the URL, right? That you call, like you say, I want like 10 posts. Like, can you show us the URL? Do I understood it right?
Yeah. So you mean if I want like you mean that the you mean like the JSON request?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like on this site, if I go to so if I go to just like WP JSON, that just shows some JSON data. This is just basically all of the kind of top level settings and stuff and what's available. If I then do posts, I get the 10 most recent posts. So if I'm going to bring up the console. I don't want the console. If I go to network, I'll need to refresh that. So you can see here, that's like my 10 posts, and you can see it is because they are just based on date and time. So it's the last 10 of my actual presentation. Now, can I do this on the fly? I think if I now do, it's something like filter num post or something, and then you would do equals like 20. I bet this won't work. Oh, did it work? No, it didn't work. Okay, it's something like that, and then you could get like 20 back. You'd need to, if you go onto the API documentation, they've got a good explanation. But yeah, you do things like that, and you can basically just keep adding to this. You can then do like another one. So if this, imagine this was working, you can then do like filter equal, and then like another thing equals something. In the same way that you would build up the loop. It's the same thing, but I don't know them off the top of my head.
Maybe another question. So if I have this API there, and then it's like a gate to my system, right? I mean, if I want to like give users only a few informations, then they can get everything they wanted if they know the API, which is really pretty simple. I mean, say I want to give them some meta informations, you know, like some custom meta, which are like part of the post.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be hidden, for example.
Talk to me afterwards, and I'll, yeah. I think that's the end, yeah. Cool, okay.
Takže omlouvám se, ale musíme ukončit tady tu přednášku.